Hello, Fort Smith. My name is Jan Ubar. I am a child and youth care counselor that is here briefly to help out during this crisis time. I work in Hay River for the HRHSSA, and I'm throwing together very humbly and quickly this video on how to talk with your children in a supportive way that best builds resiliency and their ability to cope and thrive um, through and regardless of everything that's just happened. Um, you are and will always be the most important person in your child's life. And so, how you respond to this can have a pretty large impact on how they take it and how it sits with them. Um, so, again, this is a quick video, very humbly put together. It's not definitive, it's not a program like a researched program. This is just some of my perspectives as a child and youth care counselor. And there is liable to be better programs than what I offer here today. But I thought perhaps here I could offer you some resources, some ideas, some strategies, and something to take with you that may or may not, but hopefully will have some kind of a positive impact or effect. This is meant for parents, caregivers, teachers, and really anyone that takes care of children and youth of any age. If you have adult children that are younger, this could be helpful too. And essentially, what I'm going to talk about, the core is it's about looking at the value and how to stay connected with your child throughout this, or the child. So there's been some research that I recall reading some time back. In this research, a team of qualitative scientists went to families that were experiencing and have recently experienced natural disasters, so earthquakes or tsunamis, and I believe it may have been the Red Cross or another such humanitarian organization which organized this research and were already on the ground when this stuff happened. And what they found is that in families where the parents are able to stay connected with the child emotionally throughout the course of the disaster and afterwards, even if the absolute most horrible things have happened, their entire village has been destroyed, etc. The more connected families led to less incidences of people being traumatized afterwards. So what that leads me to believe, and one of the conclusions I got from that, is that basically relationships come first and connection with each other come first, and the more kind of emotional and psychological connectedness one can have and facilitate and choose to create between yourself and your family, because it is a choice. And sometimes in some families, if there's been histories of resentment and other such things, there could be barriers. But crossing those barriers is a choice. And the more connected one can be with each other, the more resilient the whole family unit becomes in receiving the impacts of a calamity and a potentially traumatizing disaster, and mitigating the effects so as to result in healthier people that are more able to go out into the world and be well, live well, work well, relate well afterwards. So the core that we're looking at today is about staying connected and how to do that. It's also about how and the importance of taking responsibility and role modeling as a parent or a caregiver or an authority figure, um, and keeping your boundaries by staying in your role, um, and why that's important and how doing that or not doing that could look. Um, so building resiliency essentially by helping children um, face their fear, because that will be an important part for caregivers and parents to do. Um, building resiliency by connectedness, as I said. And then also, I'm going to look at some concrete specifics of how one could speak with children of different ages. Um, an example is for the very young, like infants, they're more disturbed by changes in their routine than um, the impact of the event itself. But they will no doubt feel the stress in the family. So anyway, and so one would get into later on. I'll get into things that one could say to elementary school age children and teenagers and so on. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the recent events have had a heartbreaking impact on the community of Fort Smith, one way or another. Um, everyone's been touched by this, and what that looked like for each person and how that landed is different. But there's themes among kids of and parents of feeling a bit heartbroken or feeling a loss of certainty in what it is, what Fort Smith is, and what it means to live here, to be part of Fort Smith and the community here, how safe it feels in this community, the future of the community. All these things have kind of received a blow. Um, so this has had a really large impact, and it's been obviously quite stressful and hurtful for various people in different ways. For some people that are more directly impacted, of course, this is horrible, traumatizing stuff. Um, and then there are those that are less directly impacted but still felt the kind of reverberations. Um, for example, a child that was in the school lockdown, um, that felt really scared because they were sitting in the class thinking about what if this guy's going to come to the class while everybody's sitting there silently, quite an unusual thing in a school, and more or less waiting to see if the danger will pass. Um, the different messages in media, etc. So there's been a real impact here, and so this is, I guess, what we want to talk about. And I guess there's room to talk about that potential wounding more, and sadly I can't go into that too much here, but there are some resources available for you to pursue, should you need that. I'll talk more about that more later on in the video, but um, here are some common reactions, and I'll talk about timelines and help to seek for yourself, and significant others or people you care about in the community. Some common reactions to an event like this. Now, I'm going to name a whole bunch, and you may or may not have any of these. Um, you may have some of these that come and go in waves, and it may last a short duration for a few days or even shorter, or it may last for weeks. If you find that it's lasting for 3-4 weeks, I think that's really time to seek some help. Um, Again, I'll name some resources towards the end of the video, but as you know, there is the health center here who has the counseling center attached to that. Um, So some of the emotional reactions people experience are things like shock, numbing, um, feeling exhausted, feeling wired, guilt, anger, grief, sadness, fear, and of course panic. Um, People can kind of lose focus. Like it can be harder to focus. Um, People can start looking for someone to blame, somewhere to put responsibility for the mess. Um, People can start getting kind of intrusive thoughts about it, kind of like things you can't get out of your mind, like thinking about again and again that pop up at kind of times that disrupt your day, or your sleep. Um, People can get stuck in kind of ruminating, which is kind of like a sheep or cattle grazing on all these different thoughts, just one after a time without really focusing on them in a way. Um, and one can start to feel responsible for things that are out of your control, um, like um, feeling responsible for the emotions of the whole community, or feeling responsible for the safety of the whole community, or feeling responsible for the choices that the perpetrator made. Um, yeah, it's important to acknowledge where the boundaries of one's own control and impact end. So feeling lightheaded, stomach problems, being easily startled, not sleeping well. Some people can seek closeness with others. Other people can just isolate and push everybody away. Um, People can regress to old ways of coping that they haven't relied on for a long time. Um, People can speak about this over and over again, which is a good thing, I think. People can talk about. I'm sorry. People can change the things that they're eating, or have a loss of appetite, or an increase in appetite. Um, People can feel kind of abandoned by any sense of spiritual connectedness that they have, or meaning that they have, or religion that they have, or the opposite, they can go into that more strongly than they ever have. Um, for children, this could take some forms such as the fear of separation from their family would be a common one. Um, the fear of death, the fear of this all happening again, the fear of strangers or animals or monsters in the dark, um, being irritable or angry, being extra energetic, having more meltdowns one moment but being fine the next moment, um, having difficulty calming themselves, or the inverse of all of that being like completely flat and having zero emotion at all. Um, Being very sad, um, not really being interested in school as much as before, being clingy, nightmares. One can see in the play that young children do when they play with each other that they can be increasingly kind of violent or trauma-related themes that emerge. One could see more risky behaviors in teenagers, have flashbacks, get into a space of self-blame. I should have done this, I should have done that, I should have said that. Um, if only this or that. So, yeah, those are all normal reactions to an event such as this, and that's, I guess, the image that comes to mind is an asteroid hitting the Earth, and just like, you know, it has a huge impact on the relationships in the community. So it's really vital that you take some time, take some space to to attend to those emotions and reactions for yourself and for your child. Um, Remember that a big part of being a caregiver is about role modeling. So if they see that you've been affected emotionally and you've worked through your emotions and you're coming back into a healthy space, and and that you're coping, and that more importantly that you're making an effort. I guess that's really the most. That's the thread of making an effort to cope and be well and work through things. You're you'll be encouraging your child to do that too, and they will. So it's very important to soothe your own stress reaction. And this is not just about self care, it's also about community care. Of course, we got to care for ourselves, but we also have to care for each other. And in many ways, that's a big strength in this community. People have really come together and taken care of each other and supported each other. I want to encourage that as much as possible, because self care without the care of a community or a family, self care doesn't really happen in a vacuum, or it's harder to do at least in a vacuum. That doesn't work out. So, um, yeah, take some time to go back to those hobbies, speak to your friends and family, and if they need to rant about it, that's okay. Let them rant, and why don't you take a turn too? So, so the approach to being connected that I'm going to talk about is it's about emotional validation and empathy, and I'm combining a couple of approaches, one by John Gottman and some others that I'll link. There's a webinar on emotional validation. If more of that is wanted and needed, that's free. That I'm adding a link to in the description here. But essentially, rules for, I mean, no, what am I saying? Relationship comes first, and then rules and boundaries later. I know kids, when they're upset, can sometimes do things that are inappropriate. So that's why I mentioned that. So anyway, the first piece is to soothe your stress reaction and your child's stress reaction. Um, you can't really empathize if people are way too stressed out. It probably doesn't work. Um, so for different children, different things helps them soothe. It might be just time. It might be a walk in nature. Sometimes just talking to them and letting them vent helps your kid soothe. You'll know your kid and what works for them. Touch can go a far ways. Um, Exercise, etc. Um, so your kid doesn't have to be completely calm and soothed to move to the next step. Just enough. The next piece is to empathize with their emotions and their perspective. Now, what is empathy? I'm adding a 2-minute video by Berne on what is empathy in the description here, which is very good and quite spot on. But essentially, she speaks about how if basically if your child is emotionally or psychologically in a hole, then empathy is climbing with them into the hole that they're in and experiencing that with them and feeling what they feel, and sharing that and saying, even if you don't know what to say, you can say, gee, I don't even know what to say. I'm just so glad that you spoke to me. Empathy is not saying, gee, it sounds pretty dark down there. Do you want a sandwich? Quoting Brene Brown, empathy is not saying, well, at least, whatever, yeah, it was really scary, but at least you still have a school or something like that, because that can dismiss the emotional reaction. Um, it is important to help kids remember that the perpetrator was caught. That can help kids calm down, but first one has to empathize before you can do that. So first, experience, touch on what they feel. Name it to tame it is a big piece we talk about in psychology, because it helps connect the part of the brain that controls and regulates and moderates emotions, with the part that's freaking out a little bit. So name the emotions that they're experiencing. And if you don't know what it is, then name what you think it is. That's okay if you don't get it right the first time. Just keep naming what you think it is, and that kind of um, circuitous or circumambulatory kind of path can help you come to the core. So by naming, let's see, you're frustrated, you're stressed, you're angry, you're upset, maybe are you hurt? Are you in pain? So that kind of, by naming what you see, it can help you find the core. I think some people are better at getting right to the core immediately. Other people need a bit of, you know, a bit of, um, a bit of that to get there. Um, and if you don't get it exactly right, and there will be those individuals for which nothing is ever right, um, um, then try, um, keep trying, because that's showing up for your child, and they'll love you for it, and they'll feel more connected and more seen, more safe with you, and more soothed by you because of it. So for children, safety comes through connectedness and attachment with them. It doesn't not as much as through external safety in the circumstances around them, because you are the one that creates safety in their eyes. Now, they may or may not be able to express that, but that's how that works. So this is why this is important. In validating their emotions, remember, you're validating the emotion. You're not validating what they've done with the emotion, because again, kids, sometimes when they're emotional, they can do things that are really inappropriate. Um, so yeah, you were really sad when your brother got a toy and you didn't, and so then you bumped him on the head and took his toy. I guess you were really sad and angry. I mean, it's important to still speak about the consequences of their actions. That will happen too, but relationship first, rules second. Um, so I think those consequences must always follow. They are very important. They give a child a sense of structure, kind of a sense of knowing, just a sense of internalized order, which helps them navigate their environment and life around them. Um, but first, empathy and emotions, and then later consequences. So, after that period of empathy, actually during the empathy, it might help, considering the circumstances here in Fort Smith and recent events, to start them with kind of speaking about a concrete description of what happened. Like, name the events. You were here, then you were there, then that happened, then this happened. And I think from that, usually naturally will flow their emotional reactions. And if it doesn't, then ask them, how did you feel about that? Or did you feel this way? Did you feel that way? And try to ask questions that bring up their emotions. So after the empathy piece, I think it's important to name what you feel in a transparent way. So if you were scared too, you can say, yeah, I was scared too, and I felt a bit shocked. It's okay to say. You're being more connected with your child by being vulnerable. Um, But here's the big piece with that that's really critical. While it is important for kids to know how you feel, I mean, we can all think back to previous generations where stoic parenting was the norm and how that didn't always work out very well. Um, while it is important to name what you feel, it is just a naming. It's not a cathartic emotional release. You're not you're not the child. It's not your child's place to hold space for your emotional reaction. That's not appropriate. And so you have to touch on it, but take control of it and take responsibility for it. Because if you can't, then they are going to be overwhelmed and very stressed out and confused, and they're not going to know what's going on around them because, um, yeah, I mean, essentially, they're not meant to be your supports. You're meant to be theirs. They're the child, you're the adult, right? In that moment where you're emotionally venting and releasing, which is really important to do, but in that moment, it's kind of like you're the child. And that's why you shouldn't do that with a child. You should do that with another adult. And you should do that. And you deserve to do that. And you deserve place for that. And if you don't have a place for a person for that, journaling, art making, these are things that can help you release and put that into, kind of move it into that. Or just sitting silently with yourself and feeling what you feel and exploring that and kind of validating how that feels on your own, like trying this process internally first. Uh, but name what you feel. Um, Try not to overwhelm your child with it. Name what you feel, and the key piece is doing it in a way that says that I've got this as a parent. You don't need to worry. Um, I'm still the parent. You're still the child. Yes, I feel a little scared too, or felt a little scared too. And the police did catch the person, so I feel like we're going to be okay. Or it was a bit scary too, but we took control of the situation by doing what we needed to do to stay safe. So we were okay. Nothing happened to us. Maybe if something did happen, then discussing that. But I'm imagining there's a lot of people for who there are reactions that are that sometimes need a bit of grounding in what actually happened to them. Um, so yeah, name what you feel, but do it in a way that still maintains that you're the adult, you're the caregiver, you've got this, you're in control, you're doing what needs to be done, and they don't need to worry about that because you're taking care of it. So um, then it's time to discuss consequences and rules if rules have been broken. Um, I mean, I think in this time, a little bit of grace and graciousness and patience with children is well warranted. At the same time, one can't allow completely inappropriate behavior because of what's happened. That's not okay either. So, yeah, children need boundaries and they need consequences for inappropriate behaviors. One piece related to that is setting some limits for yourself and for them with social media. Um, because, well, one can feel held hostage by the different messages in media and social media about what is happening, what has happened, what could happen. And those can have a pretty drastic impact on your relationships and your well-being. So I would set some limits, like literally set a time limit for yourself and for them. So I'm going to move on now to developmentally appropriate language, like age-appropriate language. So again, infants and toddlers 0 to 3 years, they tend to be most disrupted by the changes in routine, but also the stress in the family unit. Preschoolers aged 3 to 6, they often feel like they're the cause of changes around them. So when parents are sad or angry, children are likely to think that the child's behavior led to the parents' emotions. Um, so they might need a concrete explanation about why it's not that way. Why the parents' reaction is not the child's fault. They might need a concrete explanation about why the danger has passed, um, how the dangers affected somebody else but didn't affect you, or if it did affect you, concrete how it affected you specifically. Um, they might get really kind of distressed and really try to figure out why, um, kind of like asking why did that happen, why would they do that, and so I think in that, validating the emotion that's driving that, which is that they're scared, and kids also may want to help. So I think it's a good thing to help them with making a card or picking out a toy that they can give somebody or something to that effect. Um, so elementary school age children, 7 to 12 years old. Um, so remember that kids hear a lot of things on social media from friends at school, and this information may not be accurate, um, which can lead to unaddressed worries and confusion and ruminating about things that might be based on something totally false. So I think open discussions are really helpful to clarify that, and being clear on what the facts are. Um, so kids, I mean, adults can fall into this too, but tend to expect that the world will be predictable and fair, and people will get what they deserve. Um, and I think for kids 7 to 12 years old, what could be really shocking, um, is learning that the rules that you follow in society can't necessarily protect a person. That could be very upsetting for a child. Um, the sense that, yeah, also the idea that some people got hurt because they didn't follow the rules, I mean, that's also upsetting. Because I mean, that's a lot of pressure that the child can feel to, regarding rules. Um, yeah, and kids can feel that a bad outcome is because of something that they did or did not do, because of rules or expectations that they did full or did not full. It's usually best to be honest about life's uncertainties while underscoring that you feel safe and your child is safe. Teenagers, parents shouldn't imagine that because teens have easy access to information that they can easily integrate that information into a balanced worldview or a coherent understanding of the crisis. Um, so while teens think abstractly, you can talk with them in a way that sounds more adult, but um, they a lot of them haven't had the life experiences yet that temper their perspective into a balanced middle. Um, so teens are very sensitive to nonverbal communication from parents, and they usually feel their own emotions very intensely, um, and might very easily experience an adult's emotional reaction more intensely than the adult is experiencing it. And so I want to bring that back to emotional validation, discussing emotions with them, letting them speak about what happened, giving them opportunities to check in, to talk about what happened, and if they're not comfortable sharing, okay, fair. I would suggest keep showing them that you are there though to talk. Um, Keep giving them opportunities to talk about it and keep inviting them, not forcing, inviting them to do so and give them empathy if they do. So trying to stay calm and connected um, will bring hope. So, with regards to media or hype or fear, there, as we know, social media especially makes money from hysteria. So, um, I guess it's easy to kind of turn an event that is a catastrophe into a much larger catastrophe if you start thinking about everything that could go wrong. Um, with what's happened, if one starts thinking about, well, what if all these other people decide to do the same thing? What if the justice system fails? Um, and so on and so on. Then before long, in your own mind, you're in a place where you've created a nuclear fallout, like a war situation, and that's just not where we're at right now. So it's very important to remember what the facts are and come back to those and focus on that. Um, yeah, like if you think about the whole picture, there's parts in the whole picture that are kind of in focus right now, and then there's other parts that are out of focus. And during a crisis situation, and the recent aftermath of that, we tend to focus on certain parts um, and forget these other parts that are also there. So, um, trying to remember to remind yourself to take that perspective of yes, this disaster happened and the person has been arrested or a suspect has been arrested. Um, yes, this has had a really big impact on the community, and this is a resilient community that has survived things before and will do so again. Um, Remembering it's easy to fixate on the crime that happened and forget years of peace that previous to that. So um, just try to balance your perspective by shifting and remembering all these other pieces. Um, the perpetrator did not enter the schools, you know. I mean, it might feel that way to some of the kids because of the lockdown that happened at the schools, but the person didn't. They didn't come to the schools. That didn't happen. Um, the schools were safe. They were fine. The adults handled it, and everything turned out okay. Um, Not okay in many ways, but I hope what I'm trying to say is clear. I think certainly this is not an okay situation, and horrible things have happened for many people. And in this community, there are a lot of people that are perfectly fine too. So remember that. Um, it's easy to fall into this kind of cognitive bias where one makes one incident or one event or one example of something and tries to and turns it into a larger piece than it really is. Um, Makes it representative of a larger whole than it is. So I just want to encourage a balanced perspective with regards to how you think about that. And if you do find yourself ruminating and thinking about everything that could go wrong constantly, now that's anxiousness, and what's underpinning that is is fear of failing, fear of what could go wrong, fear of getting hurt. And I suggest sitting with those emotions first, because that's what's driving that process, and finding some way, somehow, some project to get your hands on, something to do for yourself, or other people in your community who share that feeling with you, something to do together to work through those feelings. Um, there are mental health resources available for that too. So the last piece here is just remember to breathe and have some fun. Um, Wellness, being well, and having mental health is a choice in many ways. Not always, but often it is a choice to do what one can to be well. For most people, at least. Even under these circumstances, one can choose to play some board games with your kids, or go do some sports with them, or go on a good hike with them, or take a day off and go camping. Maybe not just yet. Um, these are things that are very, very important for our well-being, and no breathing practice or meditation practice, while those things are really key to helping soothe stress, exercise, etc., none of that is going to replace the value of taking care of yourself. It can't. Um, so if you're not sleeping, binging Netflix, eating junk food, and then meditating, you're not going to be doing good. I mean, it's obvious. Sometimes people need a reminder that that's how these things work, but common sense with regards to this, you know. Okay, that's it. That's the end of my quick presentation, discussion, blurb. Um, So that's it. If you need more information about how to validate and empathize, I've got some links. There's a quick 2-minute video by Berne Brown, and then if you like, there's a more involved 4-part emotional validation training webinar, which is free, from the, what do they call, the Family Training Center or something like that. It's really good. I've done it a few times, and I've sent it to many clients. It does really hit the mark. So I suggest that. And yeah, take care of each other. Yeah. Okay. All right. Take care, Fort Smith.